It had been about a week since my sister Kate died in an accident. My niece Emily was staying at our house. Fortunately or unfortunately, Kate often brought Emily over to our place, so it wasn't a completely unfamiliar environment for her. Moreover, she was quite fond of my husband and me. However, if asked whether this situation was okay as it was, the answer would be no. So, I decided to contact Kate's husband, Tony, once again. The main topic was about Emily. Hello, Tony. Do you have a moment? There's something I'd like to talk about.
What is it? Aren't we strangers now?
What on earth was this attitude, especially considering the situation with Emily? What do you plan to do about Emily? Growing impatient with choosing my words carefully, I decided to ask directly, and his response was shocking.
Oh, Emily. You can have her. Didn't you always want a child?
What? The words slipped out of my mouth. What was he saying? It took me quite a while to fully grasp the meaning of his words.
I never wanted a child. They're noisy, and I hate them. This is a good opportunity to get rid of her, isn't it?
At that moment, everything in me rejected Tony as a person. Before even considering if he was fit to be a parent, his words were inexcusable for a human being. My throat tightened. But I couldn't back down now. Given how things had turned out, I swore to myself that I must protect Emily at all costs. All right. Since I can't entrust Emily to someone like you, we'll take her in. In return, don't ever contact us again. Just as I was about to hang up, I heard a voice from the other end saying, "Wait a minute."
If that's the case, give me the money you saved for fertility treatment.
A rare day off for the two of us together. Since both my husband, Steve, and I, Kathy, work, it's unusual for us to be able to relax like this at home during the day. It's a very nice thing. However, that peace didn't last long. A smartphone placed a short distance away started ringing.
It's ringing.
Yeah. I wonder who it could be at this time. I hope it's not work. I really didn't want our precious day off to be spoiled, but I couldn't just ignore it either. I reluctantly got up and picked up the phone, which was ringing on the dining table. To my surprise, the call was from my mother. We don't have a particularly bad relationship, but we don't contact each other that often, so I had no idea what it could be about. Maybe that's why I was suddenly gripped by an inexplicable sense of anxiety. Hello?
Kathy, it's terrible. Kate had an accident.
By the time we arrived at the hospital, my sister had already passed away. According to the doctor, the cause of death was a brain contusion resulting from a car accident. My sister Kate had passed away, leaving behind her husband and their 5-year-old daughter. I couldn't possibly accept this reality that had been suddenly thrust upon me. Why? Why did this have to happen to Kate? Steve hugged my shoulders tightly as I was overwhelmed with grief. All I could do was stand before my sister's lifeless body, shedding tears. I don't know how much time passed, but when I finally managed to regain my composure, I decided to step out of the room with Steve to talk for a bit. By the way, what about Tony?
It seems he hasn't arrived yet. I wonder what's happened.
My mother had told me about the situation leading up to my receiving the call. Apparently, The hospital had initially tried to contact Tony, her husband, but since they couldn't reach him, they had no choice but to call my mother instead. Since Kate and I had moved to New York after getting married, our parents, who still lived in our hometown, couldn't come right away, so the hospital ended up contacting me. Of course, we had tried calling and messaging Tony too, but there had been no response to any of our attempts. Part of me was wondering what he was doing at such a time, while another part of me was worried about him precisely because of the situation. Our emotions were tangled up like a ball of yarn. The clock was nearing 4 in the evening. Kate's daughter, Emily, our niece, was still at kindergarten, and someone needed to pick her up. As we were discussing this, Steve volunteered.
I'll go. In the meantime, take care of Kate.
He must have been grieving the loss of his sister-in-law too. Yet, even in such a situation, Steve remained dependable and considerate. When Steve returned, he brought Emily with him, as promised. Emily seemed confused, not quite able to grasp the situation. She's only 5. It would be cruel to confront her with the raw reality, and yet, she couldn't understand by simply observing what was happening. For the time being, we would have to lie to her in some way, even if it was a lie meant to protect her. Even knowing this, I felt another sharp pain squeezing my chest. We finally managed to reach Tony just before noon the next day. "Hello, Tony? Where are you right now?" Emily had stayed with us last night, but of course, there had been no contact from him during that time. While I could imagine the grief he must be feeling after losing his wife, I couldn't help but feel uneasy about him neglecting his daughter as well.
Oh. I'm at home.
I instantly realized he was speaking as if he had just woken up. Or perhaps he sounded like he was still drunk. Given what happened, it was understandable if he had been drinking. But for now, I put that aside and focused on his well-being. Emily is staying with us, so please don't worry about Kate, though. After a brief pause, Tony began speaking slowly, almost as if he was muttering.
Yeah. I heard. So, what should I do now?
He wasn't crying or panicking. In fact, his tone was strangely calm, which struck me as odd. But thinking that he was probably just trying to keep it together, I chose not to comment on it. "Don't worry, we'll help out too." There was so much to do. Funeral arrangements, acting as the chief mourner, dealing with all the paperwork at the city hall. It was an overwhelming amount of work. It would be too cruel to burden someone in his state with all of it. I thought that by sharing the load, we could lighten the burden. But Tony kept finding ways to avoid all those tasks, and in the end, my husband, my parents, and I had to take care of everything. During that time, we also looked after Emily. Steve and I had no idea what Tony was thinking. About a week had passed since Kate's death. Emily was still staying at our house. Fortunately or unfortunately, Kate often brought Emily over to visit, so it wasn't an entirely unfamiliar environment for her. Besides, she had always been very fond of my husband and me. However, if asked whether this situation was acceptable as it was, the answer would be no. So, I decided to contact Tony again. The main issue was about Emily. "Hello, Tony. Do you have a moment? There's something I need to talk to you about."
What is it? We're strangers now, aren't we?
The moment I heard those words, I felt as though I had glimpsed the truth behind his calm demeanor the day after Kate died. Perhaps he didn't care at all about the tragedy that had befallen Kate. Even if that wasn't the case, what on earth was this attitude, especially given the situation with Emily? What do you plan to do about Emily? Growing impatient with choosing my words carefully, I decided to ask directly, and his response was shocking.
Oh, Emily. You can have her. Didn't you always want a child?
What? The words slipped out of my mouth. What was he saying? It took me a considerable amount of time to fully grasp the meaning of his words.
I never wanted a child. They're noisy, and I hate them. It's a good chance to get rid of her, isn't it?
Do you even realize what you're saying?
Were you listening? I don't like noise. Come on, let's talk like adults, calmly.
At that moment, everything in me rejected Tony as a person. Before even considering if he was fit to be a parent, his words were inexcusable for any human being. My throat tightened. But I couldn't back down now. Given how things had turned out, I swore to myself that I must protect Emily at all costs. Fine. I can't leave Emily with someone like you, so we'll take her. In return, don't ever contact us again. As I was about to hang up, I heard a voice from the other end saying, "Wait a minute." I reluctantly held the phone to my ear.
If that's the case, give me the money you saved for fertility treatments. I heard you were seeing a doctor. Now you've got a child, so it's all good, right?
I felt my entire body bristle in shock at his audacity to demand money. This behavior was beyond human.
It should be around $30,000, right? I'll settle for that.
Who does he think he is? I was boiling with rage. But I thought carefully. Considering the future, if I handed over $30,000 now as a severance fee, we might avoid any trouble later. Paying out of my own earnings wouldn't significantly impact our household finances. After a moment of silence, I spoke, my mouth feeling as heavy as lead. $30,000. I'll pay it, but don't ever contact us again.
Glad we could come to an understanding.
After getting the bank details, I immediately hung up the phone. I never wanted to hear his voice again. He was such a vile man. That night, I regretted my decision, just a little. Thoughts like, maybe I should have discussed it with Steve, or I wonder what Emily thinks about all this, kept running through my mind one after another.
Kathy, are you crying?
Huh? It was only when she pointed it out that I realized I was crying. Hey, Emily. Do you want to go back to your dad? For some reason, there was a brief pause. The reason for that pause soon came from her mouth.
No, it's scary.
As I thought, what that man had said was indeed true. I asked Emily, driven by the moment. Would you like to live with us from now on? Emily didn't smile, but she answered with a soft yes, her face looking a little gentler. Time flies. Over 10 years have passed since Emily came to live with us, and she has now somehow become a high school student. Perhaps she got used to us quickly because she started calling us Dad and Mom. Of course, we've talked to her about her real mother. Still, the fact that she calls us that is likely due to her strong and resilient nature. There has been one other change. About a year ago, Steve was assigned to a position overseas, so he is not at home now. Steve always keeps us in his thoughts, and he makes sure to contact us at least once every week, so I feel reassured in many ways. Because of that, it's just Emily and me living together quietly and peacefully now. One morning, Emily had already gone to school, and I was busy with housework when I received a phone call. The caller ID on my smartphone showed an unexpected name.
Hey, it's been a while.
It was Tony, Emily's biological father, the man I fear and despise most in this world. 10 years ago, I had cut all ties with him, telling him never to contact us again. Yet here he was, shamelessly reaching out once more. What do you want after all this time?
Well, actually, I've decided I want Emily back.
The anger I had felt back then flared up again. No, it was more than just flaring up. My fury was boiling hotter than ever. Do you even realize what you're saying? There's no way I would ever allow that.
Yeah, I figured. So, if that's not possible, then just pay me some money. And of course, keep this between us.
I was sure of it then. He had no intention of taking Emily back. This had been his goal from the start. Then there was only one thing to do. I hung up the phone without saying a word. But the phone rang again.
You know what you need to do, right? Otherwise, who knows what I might do.
If things continued like this, Emily might be in danger. No, she would almost certainly become his target. That was the one thing I absolutely had to prevent. No matter what, I had to protect Emily. And for that, I couldn't afford to be choosy about my methods. How much do you want? Once again, I had fallen into this man's trap. I didn't consult Steve, partly because I didn't want to worry him, and partly because I just couldn't bring myself to do it. The threatening phone calls continued every few months. This went on for nearly a year, and Emily was soon approaching her university entrance exams. By that time, the amount had grown to the point where my earnings alone could no longer cover it, and I was exhausted from anxiety and anger. The total was around $50,000.
Kathy, what's wrong? Something seems off.
It was becoming harder and harder to keep this secret, and it was starting to show, even over the phone. I'm sorry. I have something I need to talk to you about when you come home.
All right, but can't you tell me now?
You're coming back next week, right? I'd rather talk then, please.
Okay, I understand.
Steve didn't press further. This was too important, and I didn't think it was something that should be discussed over the phone. The following week, as soon as Steve returned home, I confessed everything. I told him that Tony had contacted me again, that he had been extorting money using Emily as leverage, that the amount had become an absurdly large sum, and that I had kept quiet until now because I couldn't bring myself to say it. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. A deep feeling of remorse welled up from the bottom of my heart. Tears flowed and fell along with those words.
If what you're saying is true, I wish you had told me from the very beginning. But don't worry. It's not your fault, Kathy. I'll handle this from here on out. And besides, It's all my fault for ever introducing you to someone like him.
I had seen many sides of Steve over the years. But at this moment, Steve was the saddest, the most dependable, the most passionate, and, above all, the most filled with anger. It was Steve who had introduced my late sister, Kate, to Tony in the first place. Steve and Tony had originally been senior and junior members of the same university club, and he was the one who introduced my sister to Tony. After hearing my story, Steve deeply regretted that decision.
I found his weakness. This should be the end of him.
Since then, Steve had been visiting mutual friends and had finally managed to uncover some information.
I figured out why he's been trying to extort money. It's because of gambling. He's drowning in debt because of it, and apparently, he's even been dipping into his company's funds to pay it off.
Apparently, Tony's workplace was a startup company founded by a senior from the same university club days. For the past few months, there had been discrepancies in the company's accounts. Above all, using his own daughter as bait to demand money and then gambling it away was the height of depravity. I found it absolutely unforgivable. So, what are we going to do now?
I've already taken care of it. Now we just wait and see.
It seemed Steve had spoken with his former classmate, the head of the startup, and reported everything to the appropriate authorities. Then it happened. The doorbell rang with a ding-dong.
Hey! Come out! I'm in a lot of trouble because of you.
Startled by the loud voice coming through the intercom, Emily peeked out from her room.
I'll go out. Emily, stay in your room.
Hey, it's you, right? Steve. Thanks to your meddling, I'm being sued by the company. Do something about it.
You brought this on yourself. Accept your punishment quietly.
Don't be ridiculous. First of all, it's a parent's debt, so the child should pay it back, even if it means selling her body.
Enough already.
I flinched at Tony's angry shouting, which I could hear even from the dining room, and then I saw Emily pass right in front of me. Emily, where are you going? I told you to stay in your room. Emily smiled as if to say, "It's okay," and walked straight toward the entrance.
Oh, is that Emily? You've grown.
I am the daughter of the two people in this house.
What a way to talk to me after 10 years. But unfortunately, you're still my daughter.
The unfortunate one is you. In this country, once you turn 14, you can choose your own parents. I'm 17 now. So, I decide who my parents are. And I have never, not even once, thought of you as my father. If you continue to harm my parents, I will sue you for child abandonment.
Emily spoke in a single breath. Steve and I, who had followed Emily, were overwhelmed by her words. Emily had done her research and was confronting her biological father with an unyielding attitude, one we had never seen before. I could only imagine what kind of fear lay behind that courage.
Hey, acting all grown up, huh? Fine, fine. I'll leave for today.
To me, his voice sounded slightly shaky. He must have been caught off guard by such an unexpected blow. With those words, Tony turned on his heel and left.
I'm surprised. I didn't know you were studying that much.
I was so surprised that I shivered. I had never imagined that the day would come when the daughter I thought I was protecting would end up protecting us. I'm so surprised too. Thank you, Emily. Then Emily, with a smile I had never seen before, though a bit shy, said,
I'm the one who should be thanking you.
She continued,
If things had gone differently, when Mom passed away, I would have ended up with him. Just imagining that life is terrifying. But you two took me in and raised me. I've always been grateful, and I will always be grateful. So, thank you.
My vision blurred with tears. I couldn't clearly see my dear daughter's face. Even so, I hugged Emily tightly, as hard as I could.
And, you know, I had a feeling that Mom was being threatened by him. I also knew Dad was looking into things. So I thought I had to do something. From now on, I want to be able to protect both of you. That's why I studied so hard. I want to become a lawyer in the future.
Thank you. If that's your dream, we'll support you with everything we've got. But remember this, live your life for yourself, not for us.
That's right. None of this is your fault, Emily. You don't have to carry it all. But, like your dad, I will always respect your choices.
I'm so glad to be your child.
We cried, laughed, and embraced each other, the three of us together. Several more years passed, and Emily successfully graduated from the law department of a local university. She became a budding lawyer. Tuition fees, exam costs, and all the other expenses were by no means cheap, but thinking of Emily, it never felt like a burden. In fact, being able to do something for her brought me the greatest happiness. Steve felt the same way, and he worked even harder to support us. Since that incident with Tony showing up unannounced, he had stopped bothering us. We hadn't heard a single call from him, and our days were truly peaceful.
There's something I want to talk to you about.
Soon after Emily started working at a law firm, she told Steve and me that she wanted to discuss something with us. A bit anxious about what it might be, we sat down at the dining table.
I'm thinking of pressing charges against him.
By him, she likely meant Tony. But I wondered if it was even possible to file a lawsuit after nearly 20 years had passed. Can you even do that? It's been so long.
I can. And if it goes well, we might even be able to recover the money you gave him, Mom.
I'm not sure we really understand, but do whatever you feel is right, Emily. He's a man who deserves to be sued, after all. We have no objections.
I feel the same as your dad. But don't worry about the money, okay? Don't push yourself too hard.
Got it.
The court proceedings began, and the cases were resolved in no time. In both the civil lawsuit over child abandonment and the criminal case for extortion against me, the outcome was predictable. We won. Tony was ordered to pay damages. The total amount was approximately $80,000, far exceeding the money he had once extorted from me. However, Tony, who had already been drowning in debt, had no way of paying such a large sum immediately, and he was finally forced to declare bankruptcy. When all the court proceedings wrapped up smoothly, Tony, whom I saw for the first time in years, looked drastically worn out.
Emily.
Don't ever show your face again. Goodbye.
Her cold words pierced through, but there was no room for sympathy. And so, the long battle finally came to an end. According to Steve, the rumor is that Tony, after declaring bankruptcy, got involved with loan sharks and is now living a harsh life. He has been abandoned by his friends and associates and is likely living in poverty. He went bankrupt, right? Why would he get involved with loan sharks?
Well, it seems that even after everything that happened, he couldn't quit gambling. He wasn't always like this, you know.
Steve reflected nostalgically on the past. To those who knew him back then, Tony did seem like a reckless guy, but no one expected it to come to this. It is, indeed, a case of reaping what you sow. Meanwhile, Emily's work as a budding lawyer is going well, and she seems very busy every day. She is prioritizing cases involving children, such as child abuse and neglect. Needless to say, it's likely due to her own upbringing. Every time I see her running around so busily, I feel a little worried, but more than that, just seeing her brings a smile to my face. Today is the anniversary of my sister Kate's death. We decided to visit her grave together as a family. Emily, are you ready? Emily, who had taken the day off for this occasion, was modestly dressed up. Not long ago, she was still my niece Emily, but she grew up so much, and now she is a respectable lawyer, our beloved daughter Emily. As I felt the swift passage of time, a mix of happiness, deep emotion, and just a bit of sadness swept over me.
I'm almost ready.
Okay, I understand. I left Emily's room. As Emily grew older, she began to look more and more like Kate. Perhaps that's where the sadness came from.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Mom, what's wrong?
Her words jolted me back to reality. I realized I was crying. It reminded me of something that had happened a long time ago, and I found it a bit amusing. That's always been the case for me. When I'm overwhelmed, tears come before words. Huh? Oh, it's nothing. Just a yawn. Did Emily catch that little lie? But it didn't matter. All right, let's go. Kate's grave was in our hometown. After about a 2-hour drive with Steve, we finally arrived at the small church nestled quietly in the serene, rural mountains. Next to the church was Kate's grave. It had been several years since our last visit, but I was sure my parents visited frequently. The gravestone and flowers were well maintained.
Mom, it's been a while.
She softly touched the gravestone as she spoke. Watching her, I teared up again. And I spoke silently in my heart. Many things have happened, but Kate, your daughter has grown up to be such a fine person. She became a lawyer and is helping many children. And we will continue to make sure our daughter remains happy. How did you enjoy today's story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.